I'm from Northern California, so I am a Californian, which, some of your listeners are like, what, crazy? I'm a normal Californian. So in the North, we don't wear, mascara or, get $1,000 haircuts or any of that, But I grew up, relatively poor. My dad was working class. He worked for the lumber industry when I was a small kid. And then as the world changed, actually NAFTA came around, the Northern American Free Trade Association. He lost his job. He lost his,
Oh, wow.
factory job, and it got shipped to Mexico actually, which is hilarious considering I'm an outsourcer now, like that full circle, right?
Yes.
So I went to Sac State, just like
And so he was in Sacramento. That's where you guys were?
well, we're in
So was
Northern
there
California. It's called Redding, California, which is two
Reading?
and a half
Okay.
hours
Yeah,
north.
I
Yeah.
know where Reading is. So there was a big lumber industry in Reading?
Huge, man. I mean, huge. And my grandfather was a trucker. My dad worked in as a logger. My uncle
Wow.
still works as a logger.
Wow.
So this is old school America. Like in Northern
Yeah.
California, you can still like along the coast, you can still go into like a hotel and see Heartwood
Hmm.
lumber, like
Yeah.
where it's like the center of a board, which is like perfectly straight and beautiful and all that. But that's my roots. Is
What year was that?
what year was what?
What year was that transformation taking place? The
Oh
the whole.
gosh. In the late 80s, early 90s,
Okay.
the majority of it. Like
Got it.
and it all it was is California became litigious. It was harder and harder to manufacture stuff. And, at that point, I don't know if you remember this, but there was like a push for the spotted owl, you
Hmm.
know? Like there's a spotted owl in the forest, and loggers
Yeah.
would clear cut like
Yeah.
entire forests.
Yeah.
And, the environmentalists got in and said, hey, you can't do this. And,
Wow.
they weren't wrong, by the way, because you drive down up in Oregon or Washington or in Northern California and you'd have entire mountains just flat, like that's how they used to log.
Ah.
And
But it's amazing because we talk about this all the time around what is the impact of political changes, what are the impact of economic changes on your life, and that's a big impact on your father losing his job, something that he's done his whole life. That's all he knew. That must have had a big impact on you because I talk to the kids about this all the time. They need to know what the hell is going on right now, so they can develop pattern recognition as we go in the future. So how did that affect your family?
no, it crushed us. It was a lower middle class living. My dad never really recovered because he
Hmm.
was in the army and then he had a manufacturing job, and we just never kind of recovered from that. So
Wow.
financially, my mom was giving blood at one point to pay for our groceries, and it was pretty wild. I mean, we just it kind of crushed our family. Now it's interesting because we're going through that same transition right now politically where our president is trying to bring manufacturing jobs back,
Back. Yeah.
and instead of having this world where we buy goods from everywhere else, like
Yeah.
we should start buying goods from the US. And
Yeah.
it's a really interesting time, and watching it is crazy. But yeah, we were one of the families that was massively impacted by the NAFTA. And growing up, it put a hunger in me to just not be poor,
Yeah.
and I viewed business as an escape hatch. It was like an umbrella escape hatch to my life. And so as a kid, I, saw entrepreneurs as gods because they had everything they wanted. They had their time, they had money, they went on vacations, they had nice houses, all the things we didn't have. And so I knew that business was going to be my thing. So I was one of those lucky kids that, like, as a seventh, eighth grader, I was like, I'm going to be in business. And, I had no idea what that meant.
Nice.
I didn't even know, how to do it, but I
Yeah.
had this burning desire to be an entrepreneur.
That's awesome. So did your dad change industry? What did you do?
No, we ended up moving to Arizona. He went to a trade school. It was another kind of government scam. He got government debt to go to a trade school that didn't actually teach him much. And, it just, our family really suffered and struggled. And I think
Wow.
interestingly enough, I think there is a place for government to retrain and like
Yeah.
and kind of support people
Yeah.
as the whole world shifts. Like we're going through a technology shift right now.
Well, it's an interesting thing because there was this conversation around the H-1B visa and about essentially bringing people from overseas and I heard a lot of different angles to this, and I think when you shut things down like from a government perspective, and you force enterprise, you force industry to work with what they got, then what they do is that they go and start the schools to train for the jobs they need. And
Hmm.
so it's kind of like, Germany creating an apprenticeship program to teach people how to be mechanics and be in the car industry because they were desperate to get workers because they couldn't go get them from Turkey. The minute they were open to Turkey, they were done. They were toast. The Germans couldn't work anymore. So it's a fascinating. Like I've always been like a world trade person, like an open trade person. But now I'm getting older. I'm like, no, dude, shut it down. And force enterprise to invest, because if you force the companies to invest, they will build the schools, and then what you do, you can give them a credit, you can give a tax credit for every students that you hire. Will pay, give you a tax credit for their education. So but that person has to be hired, so that means you train for a job, and then we'll give you back the money for the training,
Yeah, some
as
of the
opposed to creating some bullshit school, give it like free loans, and then that becomes a scam on its own because money is cheap and free and anybody can get, and then it becomes like a click funnel, scheme, as opposed to be like a truly, like a retraining thing for a purpose.
Yeah, what's wild is I know that my dad went to an employment office that was government ran, looked at all the options, got free government like school loans, went to a school like and it none of it worked, right?
Yeah.
So I think the interesting thing about what you're saying is right now, if you want to go into the trades, let's say you're an electrician or something, well, there's a process where companies can sponsor that person and go into the trades, get practical training, and then hire them. And the problem is nobody wants to go into the trades. So we have these housing prices that are just nuts. And so, yeah,
Well,
I
I
think,
think I think I think that's also could be done by enterprise. So let's just say the Association of Plumbers, for example, they want more plumbers. If the government can, if they can, if they need plumbers so bad, they could run a marketing campaign to say how great it is to be a plumber. How
and
much
you're
money
off.
can you make?
No, you're off because the plumbers unions, just like the doctors, just like they want to shrink the pool so their pay goes up. And so that's where that this is the point of government, like is to not
Yeah.
only incent but also force. Like the medical association is a great
Yeah.
example, I mean, the cost of healthcare is out of control. And why? It's not because we don't have people who don't want to be doctors. We have plenty of people who want to be doctors. There's
Yeah.
just not enough universities that are offering people a path to being a
Yeah.
doctor. And so, anywho, this is
I think there's definitely some kind of alignment that can be, designed, and that can be, incentive program that can be done to get it done for sure. So keep going, keep going. So you're ready, and you went to Arizona, and then what happened?
yeah, we got back. Parents ended up actually getting divorced. My father was a smoker. So this is an interesting piece of my history is that I watched, my dad go through this process where the doctor said, "Hey, you've got to stop smoking now. You have, this whatever the disease was."
Yeah.
And then at first it was like you've got a really bad pneumonia, then you emphysema, now you've got cancer. So over a 5-year period, the doctor said, "Stop smoking, or you're going to die," and he didn't. And so part of who I am, number one, was this catastrophe of my childhood, my father losing his job. Number two, watching my father not have self discipline to the point where, he never saw me, start a business. He hasn't met my wife. He doesn't know his grandchildren. He died in his 40s.
Wow.
And so, my parents end up divorcing. My dad, passes away. And basically when I was 14 or 15, I was on my own. I was like doing my own thing. And, a lot of parents would like, hey, what were your grades? I'd come home, I'd be like, hey guys, I got good grades. I got a 3.7 or a 3.5. And they're like, okay, cool. Like
No one cares.
no one cared. No, like my parents didn't care. My family didn't care. And so I just happened to have good friends in high school. So we lived in a trailer on the side of town that I went to the best high school in Reading. And at the best high school, I was an athlete. And, the girls that I liked were also smart. And so I just happened to roll in the groups of good kids. And so
That's
they were
awesome.
all going to college. And I was thinking, okay, well, geez, if all my friends who have, two parents at home, jobs, nice houses, go on vacations, middle class to rich, if they're all going to college, I guess I should too, like, so I got into that trap of, I went to Sac State. I looked at San Francisco State, San Diego State, and Sac State happened to be only 2.5 hours away from home. So I felt like there was like a connection. Plus San Francisco, to get a 1 bedroom where you shared a room was like $2,000 a month. I was like, that's nuts. And the other thing that drove me crazy is parking. You had to pay for parking. And I was like, I
Yeah.
don't want to pay for parking,
Yeah.
And then San Diego was just so far away. So I ended up going to Sac State, got a business degree, graduated, realized that all of that schooling that I just had equipped me not at all to be an
Yeah.
entrepreneur or own a business. Like the only class that was any good was accounting. Like I learned accounting principles and I understood how a P&L and L and a balance sheet worked
Yeah.
academically, meaning
Yeah.
at least that knowledge was there, even if it
Yeah.
wasn't real experienced knowledge. It was
You
actually
understood what a P&L was,
I
just so you know what
barely,
it is. Yeah.
barely, so, you
Yeah.
know, but yeah, fast forward, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I bought a home. The real estate agent who sold me the home wasn't very good. And he ended up actually mailing me a key. Like he's like, hey, what's your
That's
home
funny.
address? I'm like, why? He goes, well, I'm going to mail you your key. You can't use it until we close, but I'm just going to mail it to you. The guy
That's
made like
hilarious.
10 grand, off me in commissions. And I was like, man, he was really bad. I probably can do that job better. And so that's kind of how I got started in entrepreneurship. And that was back in 2002, I think. That was
Wow.
kind of the first
So
step.
so on the way you grew up and in the hardship and overcoming and the environment, how does that inform the way you raise your kids today?
That's a hard thing because they have none of it. We live in a big house. They go to a private school. Uh, you know, they go on their stamps, for travel.
Yeah.
I mean, I
I,
drove downtown Sacramento, and if you've ever been to Sacramento, all your listeners probably have never been to Sacramento. It's a very small downtown. Like there's like 5 high rises, right? Or
yeah.
maybe 6. But as a kid, I drove and I was like, I'm looking up and I was like, wow, those buildings are so big. I'd never been anywhere. Like I didn't know what travel was. And
Yeah.
so my kids have been everywhere. So, what I do with them is I try to tell them stories and I try to help them understand how to think. And I try to, small comments like, hey, is that working with your mind or is that working with your body? Like,
Yeah.
and, helping my kids understand commitments because I feel very strongly about honoring your commitments. And so, Ramsey are honest. So there's a lot of my core values from building something. See, most of my core values, I have parents that instilled their values, and then I had to build, companies.
Yeah.
And most of my failures in life have been lessons, some sort of a lesson. And the most important lessons I've got to bring back into character traits or behaviors. And so my intention with my kids is to just talk openly. Why does it matter that you keep your commitments? Why is honoring your word mean anything? you know, if you need something in life, it's going to be your network of people who are helpful. You and I just got to experience that, you know, just recently.
Yeah.
Who you know and how they think of you and
Yeah.
whether or not they honor your, you know, you honor your commitments to them really matters.
Yeah.
And so, you know, teaching kids those lessons, um, you know, that's everything.
That's awesome. And so what are some of the things that you learned as a kid, or something that your parents did, or something that your family did, or traditional that you kept?
My dad was a hard worker. You know, not the most strategic,
Yeah.
not disciplined guy, but you know, if work started at 8, he was there at 7:20 or something. He was, you know, he was there early. He had a good attitude. He was positive. So, you know, and he was a kind human, you know, so he was a really, and these are some of the values that we've carried on. Like my wife and I fully agree, you know, being a hard worker really matters.
Yeah.
You know, growing up wealthy, my kids they're gonna see the hard work,
Yeah.
and I hope that they do the hard work too. You know? So, you know, it's one of our
It's
core
hard.
values because I
Yeah.
don't want them to lose that, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's real easy to think, oh, I'm gonna let money work
So
for
how do
me.
you teach hard work ethic? How do you train, or how do you transfer work ethic?
You know what? I only travel with people who hold this similar values.
Okay.
So you know, my kids, our friends, the people that are in our lives, they work hard. They've got lots of things going on, and so what they see is a culture of achievement
Yeah.
amongst the people that we surround ourselves. You know, we're not talking to people who are talking about how the government can help them, or
Yeah.
you know, welfare, or you know, like like I come
Sure.
from a broken family. I come from a larger family that, you know, is just challenged in all the fronts, like hard work, character, drugs, income, you know, like relationships, they're all challenged. So, you know, I'm constantly trying to surround my kids with other like-minded individuals. And then just this great old lady I met, she was actually my oldest daughter's preschool teacher. She's like, they're never gonna hear what you say. They're gonna watch what you do. And as long as you do the right things, everything's gonna work out. And so,
So I agree with that to a point, because I think sometimes kids, yes, they should 100%, but I think you definitely want to add the saying part, because sometimes there are certain things they don't understand. They miss. So they need like a narration, you know, like there's something happening in front of them. They need someone to explain what's happening.
sure.
They need to say is like, hey, you know what? This is like a cycle of the year where we work twice as much. There's a part of the year where it's slower. You know, we do, you know, normal work hours, but then there's part of the year where we have to double the gear, and then that, you know, take it to the next level, or some kind of like different variations of the same thing, where there will be a time where you're going to need to work more, you know, or like talking about starting up. When you start a business, there's a lot of work and very little results. And then sometimes no results. Sometimes you go backwards. Sometimes you go in debt to start a business, and then you're gonna work. But later on, as things get bigger and you have more revenue, you can hire people, you can leverage, and you probably will work less. So there's maybe a correlation. You know, in the beginning, you're gonna do more. Sometimes kids is like, oh, I won't do it because I don't see results. But you know, that's when you do it. So I think sometimes kids just don't. They understand it conceptually, but they don't understand it fully, and that's where you need the narration piece, and that's where the parenting comes in.
I agree. The only thing that I would say to that is that if you're not working hard, but then you're talking about these second gears, then it's all lost. And so that's the point of the saying,
Correct.
is
Correct.
that, you know, do the thing, but then
Yes.
I think as long as you're doing it and narrating, then I think you're going to be
Dude,
good.
we know a lot of people that work 80 hours weeks but then never spend any time with their kids, and then kids
Wild.
resent them
Yeah.
and they go the other way. Well, there's a lot of work ethic right there. The guy's been grinding himself, working 80 hours a week. He's thinking to himself, oh, my kids are going to see me work hard and appreciate what I did for them, the sacrifice that I did for them. But they're the opposite. They're like, dude, look, why are you working this hard? I'm never going to work that hard.
There's a tragedy
That's
in
like,
that.
I'm going to do the opposite of
Yeah.
what my dad did, which he worked too hard. I'm
Yeah.
going to go the other way. You know what I mean?
You see this in divorced families too.
Yes.
And what happens is, when a husband and wife are married and they're aligned on, character, values, direction of the family, and then there's a divorce.
Yeah.
And then the two parents have different values, different work ethics, different character things that they care about. What happens is the kids grow up and then at some point they choose.
Yeah.
And so your job as a parent is to help your children through the relationship
Yes.
choose your values.
Correct.
And so that's the piece that is missed by that guy who's making 80 hours work week.
Yes.
Because he's like, hey, I'm working this hard for them.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, you're not really working for us. We'd rather you be home.
Yeah.
And so there's really a disconnect in the relationship that is
Correct.
reaching the values. And so that's why there's disgruntledness.
Yes, 100%. So you got to have that connection, that deep, deep, deep connection, and you got to communicate, and then you got to explain, hey, this is what's going on. This is what's happening. This is what, and narrate the whole thing for them. They're seeing it, but narrate it for them. Just let me tell you what just happened. And they're going to remember, they appreciate it too. And yeah, it's amazing. They're super smart. So what are the things that you've experienced growing up? Did you have any siblings?
I did. I have a brother who's younger who, he and I grew up really close.
Okay. So what are the things that you've experienced as a young person, as a kid, that you said, that's not going to be something like, not necessarily experience, but like values or the way some things that your parents did, they said, I'm not going to do.
My parent, like I said, my parents didn't have a great plan. Like they weren't very strategic. I know that's something that you're very strategic. And I just looked at my mom and dad and said, gosh, I'm going to plan out more of my life and take steps and do the little base hits, like things that, when you're doing them in the time, there's not a lot of result, but when you do them over time and they accumulate, like I'm a finance guy, so I got to see that hockey stick that compound interest, creates.
Yeah.
But you can replace interest with all kinds of things, compound character,
Correct.
Compound time,
Reputation.
All those things. And so in the beginning, it feels like, gosh, I really wish I would have said that thing, but you know what? I'm going to hold back because I know over time it's going to matter,
Yes.
And so I think my parents weren't super strategic. They didn't stick to a thing long enough. Not really. They didn't really plan for the long term. And being an entrepreneur and also a father, there's like this push-pull between let's have some fun right now and hey, we got to do the dishes and hey, we got to, take care of your room and hey, we got to do these things because, they matter over time.
Yeah, that's cool. And so thinking about strategy or being strategic, what do you think about you? What's your goal, your vision with your kids? So what do you want, how do you see, success? What's success look like with your kids?
Well, I want to answer this realistically because I think a lot of people would come on a show like this and say, "Here's my dream for my family," and have one thing. But I want to be real. We have a young family. We have a 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and we had what we call a surprise baby who she's going to be 4 in a couple weeks. So we've got a big spread on the kids. And in the beginning, my plan for them was to just program their mind. Ramseys are honest, we work hard, we're kind and positive, like all of our values. We just kind of crammed them into their head. And the trick there is when they're not being honest, I'm not telling them they're bad or wrong. I'm like, Ramseys are honest. I think you're not being honest right now. So in the beginning, I'm, I'd say 0 to 8 or 9. I'm just teaching them our values and I'm programming them. and hopefully having lots of fun. Like that's my goal, right?
Yeah.
And then 8, 9, what I'm doing is I'm trying to like teach them or coach them to be learning the skills required to start achieving something. That's when, it really matters that you can play piano well,
Yeah.
and our 11-year-old, she's an amazing human, and she's a lot like me, so I know her faults. That's also a fun thing. My wife identifies with one of our daughters, and I identify with the other two. So, we kind of defer to each other about the best ways to parent because we really know the character
Yes.
flaws
Yeah.
and the positives that are passed down by our kids, which is
Yeah.
kind of crazy. Unless you're a father or a mother, you wouldn't understand that. But my oldest, she comes to me like 4 months ago. No, maybe 2 years ago, and says, I want to quit piano. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. What do you want to replace it with? And she goes, well, I don't know. And we start talking about it. And so I immediately go into let's fix this mode, which is what dads do, for good or bad or worse, to the chagrin of my wife. And I'm like, hey, we got to change our piano teacher. This one isn't working out. We got to make some rules around this, and we got to get some practice time, and we got to get, so what I'm looking for now, as my oldest is in that middle place.
Yeah.
My intention is to teach her the power of achievement and how good it feels to sit down. Like 2 nights ago, we hosted a friend for dinner. She's playing the piano in front of him. He says, "Hey, great job." I'm reinforcing the thing that she wanted to quit, by the way.
Yes. Yeah.
3 weeks
Yes.
ago or
Yes.
2 years ago. She's like, I'm
Yes.
out of here,
Yeah.
So in the middle, I'm trying to teach them the power of achievement and how good it feels to be good at something. One kid's in gymnastic, one's kid's in ballet, another kid's like soccer, piano, whatever it is. And then, I can't wait. I haven't reached those teenage years yet, but in that space, I'm going to be a friend. And
So how did you solve it? So I call it kind of like get into mastery. So you want them to overcome, the challenges, overcome the wall, overcome the dip, to get to that place where they're mastering something, where the world responds back and says, wow, you're good at this. And then it becomes part of their identity. Oh, I'm good at this. Now it's me. I play the piano. Therefore, I'm never quitting piano because there's just the world recognizes me as this really good piano player. So how have you done it so far? Like, aside from, so you just changed teachers? Is that what you did? Because you said you went on fix it mode, and then what did you do?
No, you're describing building identity.
Yes.
For a child.
Correct.
And it's so important as a father.
Yes.
There's this positive parenting. So, I'm actively searching out opportunities for her to perform in front of her peers.
Nice.
I'm actively putting her in position so she can be on stage.
Yeah.
I'm actively, in this case, I didn't like the teacher. The teacher had ran his course. And, my oldest has a strong personality. So she was just like running this guy over. And I was like, okay, we got to change the teacher,
Yeah.
But really it's about building identity, character, and that little feeling inside that I am good enough.
Yeah.
That they can hold on to. Because if they're really good at 3 or 5 things and their peers and the rest of the world tells them that they're good at that thing, that can translate into everything else. Like I know how to wrestle. I'm a wrestling guy. I'm really good at wrestling. Like I'm good at it, right? And I get to take that with me for the rest of my life, no matter how old I am. So that is a finite goal for what I would say 7, 8 to like 13, 14.
Yeah.
Because that's the point at which they're still young enough that you can say, no, you can't quit music.
Yes. Well, that's also part of so it's twofold. So one side also is the values piece that you mentioned. So for me, like we said, Borganas don't quit. Yeah. So, you want to quit? That's not what we do. We're like, what are we talking about? Like, We just don't do that. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
what you're saying, you want to quit. It's like, well, we don't do that. That's just not how we operate. So how can we work together to continue? And then so by not quitting, they eventually get to mastery. And then by getting to mastery, then the world reinforces that and then becomes part of their identity. And then they're just never going to quit. They becomes just, that's who they are. But then afterward is the next layer of that. The next level of that is that, okay, I'm good at this. I've gotten to this mastery level. What's the process? How did I get here? So I started as a beginner that I didn't know anything. And then I struggled and I had this imposter syndrome. I was at the gym or I was at the place and I felt like I'm an imposter here. I shouldn't be here. And then little by little, I felt comfortable and I built community. And people, and I had a teacher, and the teacher pushed me beyond my limits. And then I wanted to quit, and my parents pushed me again to stay. And I was forced to not quit. And then I overcame this wall or this dip. And then I got to the other side where I discovered that I'm good at this. Yeah. And then, so once they understand the process, then they can reinvent that process in another. That's where the narration piece comes in, which is valuable.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because now you take an event or an experience and you break it down into a system. And then you give them that system, or you can apply this to anything.
Yep.
You can start as a beginner and then overcome the wall or the dip and then achieve mastery and then do it over and over as many times as you want.
What's crazy is I see, some of my daughter's friends at school and the parents are like, well, they didn't like that sport.
Yes.
They didn't like that. And I'm like, dude,
drives me nuts.
Them liking a thing doesn't mean that, music is an important fabric of who we are.
Yes.
And so, physical activity, sports, math, like just because somebody doesn't like it doesn't mean it's a skill. So I like in that middle, we call it skill stacking, for business or entrepreneurs, like it's really important. First you learn sales, then you learn, marketing, then operations, then customers, you start stacking all these skills. That's all we're doing for kids is we're stacking skills. We're teaching them how to interact with humans. One of the craziest things that we've had to overcome recently is, sitting down for a meal, like a dinner, and we're still teaching the 4-year-old because we'll all be sitting there talking and she'll go, daddy, I want, she's 4, she doesn't know, but we like politely tell her, hey, sweetie, your sister was talking and we were locked in a conversation. And so we're in the space of teaching them how to eat and how to interact at a table. And the other day we were having somebody over for a meal, and my oldest starts eating before anybody's sitting down, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And so being a parent is half. Could I have ignored it and just pleasantly talked to my friend? He would have known nothing, and it wouldn't have been a deal. But I got to be real with her, and my job is to help guide her. So I'm like, what are you doing?
Well, like you said, it's habit stacking. So whatever you do at home, you're going to do outside, and that gives you then the world sees you a certain way, and you don't know, you're just being yourself, but you could have developed a different habit and be perceived a different way. So yeah, absolutely. And going back to that first one, the quitting piece, the opposite of overcoming and going is this situation where whenever a kid hits a wall and they hit a struggle and they're given the opportunity to quit, a lot of times what they say to themselves, they say, oh, I'm not good at this, therefore it's not for me. And then they go from, I'm not good at basketball, I'm not good at jiu-jitsu, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this. And then they're allowed to quit. And they develop these identity around not being good at something because they tried it. Obviously, they tried it. They give it a best shot. It didn't work. And then now I'm not good at it. I'm not good at math. I'm not good at writing. So, if you keep quitting, you're never going to get good at anything.
Yeah.
And then you're going to end up at Starbucks, someone's going to force you to learn how to make lattes and you're going to get good at them.
I love it. Yeah. So it's absolutely our philosophy. So teaching them grit, teaching them to stick with something, teaching them the value of, just having values and holding your commitments. It's a lot of work, but
Yeah.
I think that if you do the work when they're young,
Yes.
then what happens is the rest of I don't know. I mean,
It is. It's 100%.
I'll
Yes.
tell you if it works out for us, but if
Yes.
you do the work when they're young, what happens
Yes.
is as they're getting older, they're like, gosh, my dad said that. I probably shouldn't do that bad
Yeah.
thing. But yeah, it's been fun. It's been interesting. And I didn't expect to love a human more than my wife or myself. And that's what kids do for you. I think it makes you a better man, a better father, a better entrepreneur, a better leader in a way that just other things can't.
100%. And I think the minute you hold the baby the first time, there's a switch that, it becomes not about you, it's about them. Everything just shifts from being about you to being about them. So going back to the vision. So what's the vision? So you gave me the values, you gave me like the habit stacking. What's the vision at the end? What's the end outcome that you want to see?
Yeah, togetherness. I mean, it's a pretty simple one. I'm building legacy, thinking about what fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh generation could think of and what they need. And most families are torn apart because while they may share most of the values, there aren't these rules associated with how to interact and how to stay together as a family. So we're actively in that world right now of defining things like, and I love this. I heard this in a podcast, but Ramseys don't sue Ramseys, which by the way seems silly now.
Interesting. Yeah.
But you go 4 or 5 generations, and there's a family business in there.
Wow.
You don't bring the press in, and you don't get lawyers in, and so you start thinking about what's the long vision. It's like I want my family to stay together. I don't want to, have divisiveness or challenges. I want them to be, to be able to have open communication, work their problems out, and we're going to set ground rules for being what we're calling RFE. So the R for Ramsey or our family enterprise, RFE. So it's this idea that, we all trust each other, we all believe in each other, we all support each other, we're all part of the same team, we're all here to make impact and do good work in the world. That's the long vision is just grandchildren, great grandchildren, they're together.
That's interesting. So it's fascinating, the long-term thinking, and which, as you're saying this, we were talking about earlier about family businesses, multi-generational family businesses, and it's fascinating because you have to design it because you want harmony in your family, you want connected, you want love and connection, you want the heritage of the family to last a long time, and that connectedness to stay a long time. But at the same time, if you're thinking enterprise, if you're talking about the Ramsey family enterprise, now, if you maximize for harmony, you may end up with an enterprise that's going to be more not honest and not direct, not maximizing for what's good for the whole, and will be, essentially catering to the lowest denominator. And then whenever you cater to the lowest denominator within any type of like group or enterprise or institution, the institution will fail. So how do you balance that, the desire for harmony, love, caring for everyone, and having this multi-generational enterprise heritage legacy that's gonna last? For it to last, it needs to be thriving, and for it to thrive, it needs, tough decisions, honesty, you know what I'm talking about. So how do you balance the two? How do you put that code, in that, because you're not going to be here, so you want that to be, automated, if you will, or programmatic, if you will, through multi-generations. So how do you do that?
We're working towards, number one, it's always education.
Yeah.
You've got to teach your children how to value assets and not value consumerism. So buying the nice cars. You know, I have a almost 10-year-old truck. My wife has a 9-year-old minivan. You know, we're not out there spending money. So number one, I think it's education, value assets, and not things, right?
Sure.
Number two, it's really investing in, you know, the education of each individual member of the family
Yeah.
at a high level, meaning
Sure.
it matters that they understand business. It matters that they understand wealth and asset accumulation. And it also matters that they respect each other, because not all of them, you know, my wife's, you know, was a teacher. They're not all going to want to be entrepreneurs. So
Correct.
you need to respect each person for their individual choices, and also honor the fact that the business is the bedrock of the enterprise. So it's tricky, man, but
Yes.
it's down to education, communication, and really, you know, the family, keeping those values and the togetherness of the family as the bedrock. But that's our plan.
Hey, Daniel, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time.
Jay, I love this podcast and I'm so excited for you. And I like listening to all of your guests on this show, because that's how I've got all my best ideas, is talking to other humans who are doing great jobs. So thanks for having me.
That's
and I'm
awesome.
honored to be
Well,
here.
tell me, what do you think about the Raising Lions group?
It's really good. It's really good. I mean, here's the thing. We all hit roadblocks, and the best source of information is from lived experience, other fathers and mothers who've been through that same experience. And when you have a community that, like, people can chime in on what your big challenges are, I mean, it can be pretty impactful for keeping your family together, as you know, and making things right. So yeah, I'm a big fan of surrounding yourself with community.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.